Today we are starting with absolutely nothing and working towards one goal, building the strongest skyblock empire on the server. Right now, all I have is a tiny island floating in the void. In order to have a strong foundation for my empire, I need to complete 3 tasks. Like every player on the server, I started by claiming my starter kits. Luckily, I've been playing on the server before and previously unlocked the magician rank. With my starter gear collected, it was time to begin the classic skyblock grind. Mining cobblestone, breaking trees, and trying to turn this tiny floating island into something that actually resembles an empire. One of the first things that this server does differently from others is lucky blocks. Lucky blocks can contain all kinds of rewards, but the items I really wanted were special hoppers and mob spawners, since they'll become incredibly valuable later on. After breaking them and collecting my rewards, I realized just how cramped the island felt. Every time I moved, I was one bad jump away from falling into the void. So before doing anything else, I expanded the island and gave myself enough room to actually work. Once I had some space, I equipped my magician armor and got my cobblestone generator up and running. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, but I quickly discovered that the cobblestone generator would become one of the most important parts of my entire island. The first task of completing the foundation of my skyblock empire was complete. However, while I was mining, I learned something that completely changed my plans. The only way to unlock skill tree tool progression early on was through personal missions, or as everyone else calls them, P missions. Unlike island missions, these tasks are tied directly to me as a player, so if I wanted stronger tools and eventually Super Breaker, I need to start completing them immediately. So from that point forward, everything I did had one purpose: finishing as many P missions as possible. The first major reward I had my eyes on was Super Breaker. Now, if you've ever played on a Minecraft server before, you know what Super Breaker does and why it's a total game changer. But just in case you haven't, instead of slowly mining ores one at a time, it allows you to instantly break entire sections of your ore generator for a short duration, which means more resources, more money, and way less time staring at cobblestone. However, I had a problem. Unlocking it would require me to complete a mountain of missions, so I got to work. Since mining was already one of my main professions, I upgraded my ore generation as quickly as I could. Every upgrade unlocked better ores like iron, gold, and even diamonds. The faster I could make money, the faster I could invest it back into the island. At least that was the plan. The missions themselves weren't exactly difficult. Some of them were annoying. One mission required me to build a farm. Simple enough, or at least that's what I thought. I somehow spent way longer than I want to admit trying to figure out how beetroot worked. Apparently, beetroot grows from seeds, not from beetroot. After finally getting the farm operational, I moved on to fishing missions, which meant building a pond. Now, fishing isn't exactly the most exciting profession in Skyblock, but it becomes incredibly important later on, so I wanted to start making progress early. After finishing the pond and knocking out a few fishing objectives, I headed over to the Dragon Boss Arena, commonly known as the D-Boss Arena. In this arena, you fight off summoners. These summoners will have a chance of dropping summoning eyes. They also drop XP and sky coins, which is a nice touch as it would feel a lot more painful of a grind if not. You can then use these summoning eyes to spawn a dragon boss. There are a few different types of dragons. Each type of dragon drops its fragments, which we can then use to make armor with special effects that buff us on our island. Needless to say, this armor will be extremely useful to us later on. Visiting the D-Boss Arena was another requirement for my P missions, and thankfully it didn't take too long to complete. With that finished, it was back to the grind. More mining, more upgrades, more missions, and slowly but surely, progress started stacking up. I upgraded my ore generator again, I improved my fishing setup, and made it so I could fish without constantly filling up my inventory with junk. Then, while I was working on all of this, I started thinking about something much bigger: the future of the island. You see, most people build their islands as they go. They place farms wherever they fit, move things around later, and eventually end up with a giant mess. I didn't want that. If this was going to become the strongest skyblock empire on the server, I needed a proper layout from the beginning. So I started researching how chunk loading worked on this server, and what I found completely changed how I wanted to build the island. There are 6 professions in total, and 5 of them can be trained directly on your island. Out of those 5, mining, slaying, and fishing are by far the most important to me. The interesting thing is, all 3 can be trained without ever leaving a single chunk. And since this server loads 2 chunks around your player, I realized I could build all 3 grinding areas together, meaning every second spent standing there would be maximizing my efficiency. The Empire wasn't just going to be powerful, it was going to be optimized. There was only one problem. My current island wasn't optimized at all. So naturally, I had to tear half of it apart. The mob spawners had to move, the fishing pond had to move, and a lot of work I had already completed needed to be rebuilt somewhere else. Pain, but necessary pain. I started by creating a massive platform that would eventually become the central hub of the island. This would be where most of my grinding happens moving forward. To make planning easier, I outlined the chunk boundaries with pink concrete. Not because it looked good, because trust me, it did not. But because I needed to see exactly how much space I had available. Once the outline was finished, I began removing some of the temporary structures I had built earlier. Although there was one thing I couldn't bring myself to destroy, the original Skyblock island. There's just something so cool about keeping a place where everything started, even if it serves absolutely no purpose. After preserving the starter island, I began planning the rest of the Empire. The crop farms, the tree farms, the profession areas, everything had a purpose, everything had a place. The crop farm was mapped out first, then the tree farm. Neither looked particularly impressive yet, but both would become incredibly important later, especially the tree farm, because the wood isn't just used for building on this server, it's used to create statues, and statues provide profession bonuses that can massively increase progression. So even though it looked like I was just planting trees, I was actually investing in the future upgrades. Or at least that's what I'm telling myself. Once the large farms were planned out, I shifted my focus back on the central grinding chunk. This area was going to house everything I needed for mining, fishing, and slaying. I started creating dedicated fishing spots, one for normal fishing and one for lava fishing, which sounds ridiculous, but trust me, we'll be getting into lava fishing in a future episode. After that, I built a collection area for my mob farm. I never made a mob evader, so I did some research, which eventually led me down a rabbit hole of tutorials. Eventually, I got everything working. Well, mostly. Just as I was getting into a rhythm, a rift opened. Now, rifts are limited time events that appear every few hours. Inside of them, players can gather special resources used to unlock powerful enchantments. And because those enchantments are extremely valuable, I dropped everything and headed in. For the next hour, I grinded the rift as much as possible, but by the time it ended, I had collected a decent amount of loot. Not enough to upgrade anything, but enough to get started. Although if I'm being honest, I'm probably just gonna buy most of the skulls later because farming them is incredibly annoying. After the rift closed, I returned to the island and finished building my crop farm. This is another important step to the strongest foundation for my Skyblock empire. I finally started pushing through the remaining P missions I still had available, which reminded me, by the end of the day, the island looked completely different from where we started. What began as a tiny floating platform that had turned into a foundation of a real empire. We've unlocked multiple upgrades, built dedicated profession areas, created long-term expansion plans, and completed all the way through Tier 3 P missions. Now we're pushing into Tier 4, and things are only getting started. Because in the next episode, we're focusing on a single profession, fishing. And trust me, the progression from that one profession alone is absolutely insane. So if you enjoyed today's video and want to see the Empire continue to grow, make sure to press the like and subscribe button. And if you have any comments, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.